Hello. Today we are going to discuss about the different ways or methods to connect to the Kubernetes cluster using Kubeconfig file. So let's get into the details. This is client machine preparation actually. Client machine is nothing but your desktop or laptop or wherever from you want to connect to the Kubernetes cluster using kubectl tool. Actually, kubectl is a tool that can directly interact with the API server of the cluster component. So the tool is directly connect to the API server using some security layer securities in terms of some of the certificates, CS certificates, digital keys, service accounts, and all. The first and foremost thing before getting to the server level config file details and all, our local machine has to be prepared. If it is first time to install the Kubernetes kubectl tool, you should download it from the official website of the Kubernetes. This is coming from the here. Let me go to the official website of the Kubernetes and let me download this one. Download the kubectl tool. There are three kinds of downloads are there. Installations are there. One is for the Linux and another one is for Mac, and finally it is Windows. Myself, I am using Windows desktop. That's what I'm going to download the kubectl for Windows desktop or laptop. So install and set up kubectl on Windows. Install kubectl on Windows using curl command. I'm taking this curl command. Let me copy paste it and opening the CMD. I'm opening the CMD command prompt and I'm copy pasting the same curl command whichever I copied from the official website and enter. It will download the kubectl.exe file only, not anything else, because after downloading the kubectl on your download folder, you need not to install it anyway, all like other our softwares. You just need to place it to somewhere else in the central location, and then you have to set up the environment path in that location, environmental path, so that the kubectl can be invoked, I mean call from anywhere in your local desktop. Okay, let it be finished to download. I will show you how to set up the environment variable and all. Okay, now it is downloaded. Let me check it where it is downloaded. Sorry, dir. Yeah, it should be there here somewhere. I am in the C drive users user. So cube, here it is kubectl. So this is the date and timestamp. It is downloaded. Let me go to that directory. C users. So it is here. I'm copying this one and going back. I have created one tools actually. I copy paste here. It is there. I'm replacing it because I'm using the central one of the my convenient one of the central location to keep all the third party CLI tools like AWS CLI, GCP CLI, Azure CLI, kubectl CLI, because if I put on the centralized location in my local desktop, I need not to be invoked it again and again from calling the full path of the CLIs. So that's what I taken it from here, and I'll put these tools in the environment variable, user environment variable env. I'm opening it. I have opened the user environments. So environment variable, user environment, updating the path. Next time if I download the AWS CLI, that also can be invoked easily. So path new, I put it. If you copy paste or download anything in that location, in the same tools location, that can be directly invoked. Now I have done my setup, environmental setup. Let me check the kubectl will be downloaded or not. Exit and I'll reopen that CMD file. I have opened it again. Let me kubectl version --CLI client. Now it is invocable. So I have done my setup kubectl. So this part has been completed, and go to the next part. So Kubeconfig file. Actually, as I told that Kubeconfig file is nothing but Okay, let me explain you kubeconfig file. Actually, kubeconfig file is nothing but a configuration file. It is cluster configuration file located in the cluster master server at home directory .cube slash cube config. The file name is config. So that can be located in the master server in this location $home slash .cube hidden directory .cube. In that hidden directory, it will be generated at the time of installation of the cluster. So all the cluster information including this config file. So what are those information? This config file can be used by all the components of the master server including kubectl. Kubectl is one of the tool that can be installed in the master server. So if you watch the master how to install Kubernetes clusters, in that you will have all the information, what are the tools required to installation and running for the Kubernetes cluster in healthy state. Okay, that is the different topic. Now this config file is the centralized file that can be used every tool in the Kubernetes cluster and contact with the API server, so that you will get the information and data to share among of the Kubernetes cluster nodes and master node. So what the content containing in the config file, that is CA certificate authority data, server information like DS names or IP address of the master server, and the name of the master server, cluster name, username, the username of the service account. Username is nothing, user is nothing but a name of the user or service account. Token, this token, two tokens, cluster tokens and user tokens. These are the 5 mandatory information it will have. Let us look into that full file in the server itself. I am logged into my controller, master server. So let me go to the config file location, home slash .cube. So you can see that this is the config. This config file containing all the information. Let me show you what is there in that inside the config file. Cat config. See, I'll explain you the content what it is actually regarding. So the config file API version, that is the different topic. Cluster certificate authority data and the server IP, this master server IP, and name of the master server cluster configuration, and context name of the cluster. This is the name it is using. Okay, so coming to the users preferences is username is Kubernetes admin, that is service account which can be used, that is the default and super admin service account. It can be used by the API server to validate all the cluster components. All the cluster components directly connect with the API server using this service account. Without any service account, nothing will be interact each other in the Kubernetes cluster. There should be a service account, nothing but a username, and there should be a client certificate, that is the digital certificate that needs to be interact with the API server. API server has to be validated by seeing the data into the config file. Okay, and these are the two important key data, client certificate. Okay, that's it. This is the all certificate data. This length of data it is actually. Okay, so yeah, let me clear the screen. And this is all about the Kubernetes file, kubeconfig file actually. Okay, it is located in the master server. Okay, next page. Different methods. This is our main motto. Different methods to connect to the Kubernetes cluster with the configuration file. Actually, the configuration file is residing in the master server. That is the master configuration file, so that nobody can access except Kubernetes administrator or cloud administrator. If it is managed clusters, the cloud administrator can get the Kubernetes configuration file actually. So that configuration file is the key file to interact with the API server. Any person, any tool or any utility are inside the Kubernetes cluster, or somebody is connecting from the outside. So the config file must have the context name, that is context name what we have already seen in that context name cat, let me show you that without any station. So this is the context name. That context name is the most important. Without this context name, you cannot connect to the Kubernetes cluster. So the first method is to connect with the context name. Second method is kubeconfig variable. Using kubeconfig variable, export the kubeconfig variable and you can connect it to the Kubernetes cluster. And the third method, final method is a command line, command inline references. While using the command, you have to mention -kubeconfig equals to the configuration file you are going to be connect to the which cluster. I'll explain you actually. This is not clear even if you read this three different types of ways to connect to the cluster. This is not clear. I will explain you. kubectl context file. This context name, using this context name, you should connect to the Kubernetes cluster. What does it mean? The context name is there in the config file. So you should get the config file. The config file containing username and user password. Password is nothing but in terms of, because Kubernetes is cluster is most important. So you will not use passwords. It is key based logins. All user accounts are key based logins. Who is the user here? Whoever wants to. Suppose I am the user, my name is user. I am connecting from my desktop to Kubernetes cluster installed somewhere around in the cloud EC2 missions maybe. So they can share you the config file according to your user roles and responsibilities. So that config file can be shared, that config file containing the context name. So you have to set up the context name and then try to connect to the cluster. The first method, let's see the first method. Second method, third method, easy to understand. First method is a little bit, need to be understood clearly. Let me go for first. The method one, connect to the Kubernetes cluster with kubeconfig. Okay, kubeconfig. In the kubeconfig, it means configuration file containing the context name. So get this, get the context name. I am taking the master server context name. Basically in the real time you will not get this master server. If you take this master server config file, means you are the cluster user, means you can do anything in the cluster. You can destroy, delete any pod, everything. You are the super user. That's what in real time purpose nobody can share you this config file. It will be created for you separately with your roles and responsibility in the team. Okay, so for the sake of purpose I am just how to generate the new config file also we will discuss it later part. So now I am taking the master server, the master config files. Okay, copy. I'm going to copy this one and opening the git bash. It is like our putty terminal. We are very habitual. Okay, go to here, open one of the vi config. Okay, and whatever I copied to there, copy pasted here, saving that, open it and see it if anything is there. Yeah, so everything is there. I have whatever copied from there, I'm getting here. Okay, let me clear it, enlarge it first. Let me clear this one. Is there any kubeconfig? How many are there? Config file. Okay, let me open one more time, because if anything is not good in the inside of the file, then it won't work properly. Okay, fine, everything is good. Now in local machine also you should keep this config file in the user home directory .kube. Under that you have to copy this config file to there. So is there any .kube in my home directory? There is no. I am making one directory .kube. I am copying that one, not moving, actually copying that one config file to the .kube directory. Okay, go to the .kube directory. Okay, fine, I have config file now it is there in my home directory. Because which is my home directory? This is my home directory. Go to the home /config kube. So this is my home directory. I have the config file. This is the config file. Now config file is copied in my local desktop or laptop home directory .kube. because kubectl will search for the config file in the home directory. Now what should we do? From here in my laptop, I have to connect to the Kubernetes cluster master machine, master server. So kubectl get nodes. How many nodes are configured? If it is displayed, anything, any kubectl cluster related command is working, then you are able to connect. Which context currently using? That is the most important. See here, this is the command. You can get the current context. What is your current context? Sorry, kubectl config get context -o equals to name. Which context I am currently using? This one. So let's say it is a production context. Okay, so this is production. Now what is use current? If you want to change the existing current context to the desired context, you can use this command. You can use this command kubectl config use context name. This context name is available in the config file. Okay, so this is the way you can connect to the cluster. Remember that I copied the master server config file, but in real time nobody will share you that config file, because if you get that file, you are the super admin of the Kubernetes cluster. Then where is the security? Because hundreds, thousands of containerized applications are running in Kubernetes. If it is production server or development, whatever it may be, different teams are working on that Kubernetes cluster. Then you go and destroy one of the part, then the team or that project will be surprised, where is my application. If you kill any of the part, of course there is a self-sustainability is there Kubernetes. One of the feature is to self-healing. If you kill the pod, that pod automatically recreated because of the replication set. Okay, that is the different topics. So this is the one way we can connect from using the context name. Okay, the second method is, I said that environment variable kubeconfig. Using this environment variable also we can connect. How? Let's say example. I am taking this example as my config. I am renaming my config file. Suppose to say this config is the default config name. In real time you will get number of config files. Why? Because you have access to the QA, production, development. So there are each in each environment you have different accounts, different responsibilities. Then what is the in production you may be only read only. In development you have read, write, execute, super admin like kind of thing, because you need to do anything on the pod system and on API resources. And QA system you have only a few of the namespaces can be accessed. It depends on your project requirement. So in that case, what you have to compare that whatever you developed, the application is deployed on the QA. You have to check with the production server if something is running related to your project. Then you must have go to the production server and you have to check it. For that, you may get a few read access only on the few of the applications containers. Okay, so that kind of that way you may get number of config files, 3 config files. That 3 config files should be having should have the location at home directory only. So because of that, if you copy paste config, then you will get the it will be override each other. So in real time also they won't generate the config file like all at the time of generation of the config file. How to generate the config file by Kubernetes administrator, that will be having you can get it in the other tutorial, actually other video that you can watch it. Now let me show you that how to set up that kubeconfig environment. So here there is a simple thing. See, export kubeconfig. I'm just copy pasting this one as it is. Now my kubeconfig name has renamed to dev cluster config. Let me copy here config to this is another name. The same file. I'm just imagine it. It is my development config file, cluster config file. Okay. How many of now dev cluster config? Let me open and change the context name. So only context name is not possible actually. Real time different, all keys and all everything. I'm just showing you that how to actually to display Kubernetes admin. Yeah, let's say dev. Okay, so I'm exporting it now. Export kubeconfig file. Okay, so now what is my context name? Current context name kubectl config get context -o equals to name. What is it? Dev. Earlier it is only here because for the sake of demo I have changed the config file as dev. If you have one of it like QA, copy, I'm copy pasting that. I'll say that it is a QA. Open that QA context configuration file, and I'm changing dev as a QA. See this context name, because of the only context name your local config file support, you will connect to the Kubernetes cluster. Now export that QA. Export the QA related QA cluster related config file QA. Now see this, what is it? Yeah, get context name. Now it is QA. Export our real original cluster config file, master server config file config. Now what is it? Config. Because you are set up the environment variable and try to connect to the appropriate Kubernetes cluster. It is dev, QA or production. Got my point? Fine. Now you can get all details, node details or all namespace details. See, this will display all the namespaces. Let me clear screen and copy paste. Get all -all namespace will provide you all namespaces related running pods. It will display all namespace related running pods including Kube node list, Kube system, Kube public, dashboard. I have installed dashboard dashboard and metric server, and there are a lot of I have implemented including default. You know already how many of the namespaces are exist. kubectl get namespaces. You will get by default there are 4 namespaces. Default one, node list, public and system. Web apps, this dashboard and dev tools. These are my customized namespaces I have created. But by default at the time of cluster installation you will get 4 namespaces. Default, node list, public and system. System is system related pods will be generated. This is static pods, everything 90% it can be provisioned by static pods only. And default, whatever pod you can install, that can be by default provisioned in the default namespace. If you want to see what are the pods there in the default, kubectl get pods. If you are not providing any namespace, then you will get the only default namespace running pods. So there are no running pods in the default namespace. Okay, this is all different topics. Let's get into the third option, actually a third method to connect to the third method is to connect actually inline method. So in the earlier second method we exported the config file and trying to connect it. In this also the same, you have to just export the config file along with the command, along with whatever command you want, you can export it like this. If you want to running a pod, you should export this config file in the pod itself while applying the pod. Apply like so. This is nodes. You will not get anything because we don't have a dev environment. We just for the demo purpose renamed and seen showing you the context name and all like this way. But we have a config, right? Let me config. Now you will get the nodes because I have only one cluster environment. There is no development and QA. The sake of purpose, only demo purpose, I have renamed the config itself as a dev QA. Okay, these are the 3 ways to actually connect the Kubernetes cluster from your local machine to the Kubernetes cluster. Okay, so if you want to delete the cluster context, you just simply what are those are there. You have to display first what are those context from your local desktop itself. clear the screen, copy. So currently this one, I want to delete that current context name. Then you have to copy and delete context. Use delete context and the context name. So warning, this removed your active context. Use Kubeconfig use context to select a different one. If you want different one, use context and context name. So now you won't get any output if you run this command again. What is my current context? Nothing. If you want to set the current context as like this, whatever he said here, is this is the current context in my kubeconfig file. Insert. So Kubeconfig can use current context. No context exists. Okay. So this is a way to delete it. Now, yeah. This is it. Thank you. If you have any doubts, post in the description. I will reply on that. Thank you very much.